Well, welcome back to another episode of Rethink Real Estate, guys. Today, we've got Jim Remley. Now, Jim not only is a broker owner himself, but it also runs eRealEstateCoach.com and has had some extensive experience in real estate starting at an incredibly young age. But the one thing that also that really attracted to having Jim on today was that he ran a course called the Accredited Buyer Representative for 10 years leading into, whilst he was obviously doing real estate. And obviously, that's a big topic of what we talk about today. It's a topic around how the lawsuits, I think he's going to affect the industry. We also talk about recruitment and retention, not only from a brokerage standpoint, but also building a team and some different thought processes and just some of the coaching habits that then from a retention perspective that he sees work the best within the business. Hopefully it's a really relevant episode to you. Hopefully you enjoy the content. Thanks very much for listening. Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. Jim, welcome to Rethink Real Estate.
Hey, Ben, I'm super stoked to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, Jim, first of all, let's do the elevator pitch on you and give the audience, the juicy facts so that they pay attention and understand why you're here on the podcast today.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. I've been doing this for about 35 years now. Started when I was 19. Got in the business and very fortunate that I took 150 listings in my second year. Then I pivoted and opened my office like everybody thinks they should. Lost money there for a couple of years, but I turned it around and we grew that to 17 offices. And then most recently in the last few years, I grew another company in Southern Oregon from 30 agents to 250 agents, got listed in the top 500 companies in America. So we're
wonderful.
in a small population of 80,000. We're doing 3,000 transactions a year, $1.4 billion in sales.
Oh, wonderful. Well, hey, look, again, it's definitely one of those things that is one of the hardest things that I've seen people go through is the transition from an agent into being a broker. Yeah. It's amazing that really good salespeople or really good agents typically don't make really great brokers in many, many cases. I guess that maybe that's a good place to start from your perspective from the transition, understanding, probably that first step into the brokerage side of it wasn't as great and grandiose as what you ultimately thought it was going to be. Yeah. So maybe talking a little bit about that journey of anybody that's thinking at the moment of being from an agent into a brokerage, or they maybe have just gone into a brokerage and they're like, oh, I don't know if I should be doing this. What are some of the things that they probably need to think about, learn what you learn, all of those things?
Yeah. So when you're an agent and you're a top agent, there's a natural tendency to think that you're supporting the brokerage. And if you just took all your production out of the brokerage, you could just have this incredible company. And the fact is you forget all the costs that are involved in running a real estate company and the time and the effort behind it. So I was one of the first teams to form 30 years ago in the state of Oregon. And when we analyzed our numbers, we saw, hey, we could be second in the market, competing against offices, just me and my team member. So let's do it. Let's go open an office. And of course, as soon as we did that, our production cratered because you instantly have to manage a million other things besides real estate sales. And the biggest mistake I made in those first, I would say 2 to 3 years, is I thought that I was going to go out there and hire a bunch of people that were going to be just like me, reflections of me. You just don't do that. It just doesn't happen. Most agents are not going to be top producers. Let's just be honest about it. So there is you definitely want to really think about it, whether you want to be an owner, because ownership of a real estate brokerage is different than ownership of a team. And it's certainly different than being a top producing agent.
And obviously with downward pressure when it comes to commissional splits, with the virtual models that are ultimately out there at the moment, that, I think that, are eroding away that profitability within people's offices. Like our company itself, we've got 9 offices in Oregon, I find that the caliber of agent in your marketplace, I really do find is a higher caliber of agent than ultimately what there is elsewhere. Like some of the level of cadence that our agents have within Oregon, and what I mean by cadence is volume of deals that they do. Our business in Oregon probably does about 80% of its revenue comes from listing side commission, just by nature of the way of the markets that we're in and the nature of the people that run those businesses and brokerages there. I think that in Oregon, the standard is set much, much higher from a real estate perspective. Is there any particular reason that you find that?
I think that in smaller communities, in Oregon by nature is a smaller community, it's much more relational. and much more of a tighter knit sphere of influence based business model, which tends to lead to better production. Whereas you get into bigger cities and you start to look at transactional based real estate business, and realtors really become a commodity. And so they're like, you're one of 20,000 agents I could choose from. Why am I going to use you? And there's talk about commission pressure. There's even more commission pressure in those metro markets. So we've been fortunate that we've been able to compete. Like I said, that we're one of the top 500 companies in America. We're competing with companies in LA and Boston and New York in a small population base of 80,000. I think that's exactly why, we're able to serve our communities and have a much tighter relationship.
Yeah, right. So I think that, the question that I've got is around the recruitment and retention of people, first of all. Yeah. And again, people might think that that's only applicable to business owners and people that are running brokerages. Now, that's not actually the case anymore, is that, I think that one of the things that is one of those trends that's moving through real estate is that the popularity of growing a team. Yeah. And, whether you buy into it or whether you don't buy into it, I do think it's a little bit of a hype culture at the moment around that you should have a team, but 99% of people go, well, I should have a team. Why should you have a team? Well, I don't really know. And there's not a great deal of purpose behind that. So, Jim, I guess that viewing it from both sides of the brain, the broker side of building out a business and ownership of a business, but then also somebody that's just trying to build a team as a general realtor that's selling homes, what's the ultimate things that they need to understand about recruitment, first of all? Where do they look? What do they do, in order to bring people to them?
Well, the first thing you have to understand about recruiting, whether it's, team recruiting and brokerage recruiting, a little bit of a different animal, but let's start with teams. So as a team, somebody that wants to build a team, and we get it every single day in brokerage ownership, I want to build a team, just like you're saying, Ben. And then my first question is, well, let's talk about your production first and whether it warrants you having a team. You cannot have a team unless you have enough leads to hand to team members. The only reason why somebody's going to join a quote unquote team and they're not the team leader is because they think they're going to get leads from you as the team leader. So if you can't deliver leads, or at the very least deliver a playbook for them to generate their own leads, you have no business starting a team. So you got to say, number one, I have to have proved my algorithm of sales, like how I'm approaching sales. And I got to be able to almost sell that like a franchise, like a system to somebody else, that I'm going to show you, I'm going to take you from 5 transactions a year to 20 if you join my team, or I'm going to hand you those leads to help you make that happen. So that,
or open houses as well. Like, you've got to have a high level of inventory coming through the door where you're going to need people to sort of run those opens for you in order for them to build business in one way, shape or form. If it's not leads, it's got to be something from an inventory perspective. Is that right?
100%. So if I'm a team leader and I've got 50 listings, I can afford to have some buyer agents working for me that can field those teams, do open houses, network and prospect around those houses, for sure, 100%. The challenge for team leaders, though, over the last, let's say, 5 years, especially during this market downturn, is that some team leaders got trapped into buying leads from places like Zillow, Realtor.com, Homes.com, and they created a whole business model which worked 5 years ago, where you could have an ROI on buying leads and then reselling them basically to your team members and getting a spread or a margin on that cut. So you're spending 5, but you're making 15. You're spending 10, but you're making 30. That ROI has gone negative. It's now a negative 32% return. So every dollar I spend, I lose 3, right? So I cannot afford to do that as a team leader. So then I got to say, well, now I got a problem. How else am I going to create leads? And you got to go back to old school basics and fundamentals and creating your own playbooks and creating your own leads from other sources.
Yeah, it's interesting how it's funny. We had a podcast episode and it went relatively viral, I should say, maybe in a little bit of a negative sense, is that, I'm really not a pure believer in the buying of a lead side of business. I think that it really puts a foundation on quicksand. I really believe that it's a lazy way through real estate, and it teaches really bad habits to those that then come in that, and I obviously make my opinions pretty clear. I at the end of the day, I think that we have to, when it comes to having a public voice in things, but when that episode released, the barrage of people that we had saying, it's really different if you're an agent out there starting in the industry and really needs to sort of make money and all that stuff. It's like, yes, but you're not being taught how to generate your own leads. You think that it's been put on a platter for you, and without that skill set, I don't think there's any self-sustaining model for them in the future. Yeah. So Again, there's a whole thing that we could go down on the lead side, but we won't dive down that rabbit hole, Jim. I think there's more valuable things we can talk about. Let's talk about brokerage recruitment as a whole, bringing agents into your brokerage. Obviously, there's the same skill set. There's something along those lines, but it is a little bit more. It is a little more different, correct?
Different. The difference is the business model for brokerage is I make money when I have agents working for me. They are my profit center. So these are my quote unquote customers. From a team's perspective, we make money when our team sells real estate. So it's a different model in that I have to understand as a brokerage owner, if I have 10 agents this year and I have 10 agents the next year, I'm probably making less money this year than I did last year because of commission erosion and a lot of costs rising and everything else. I cannot afford to run my business like that. I've got to increase my customer base by continuing to recruit consistently and effectively. So you have to look at it from a business model. A lot of brokerage owners don't do that, and that's a mistake. I will tell you the number one mistake I made as a young brokerage owner was for the first 5 years I owned my brokerage, I took the path of going after new agents. So every single month for 5 years straight, I'd rent a hotel room, conference room. I'd run ads and I'd get people to come, 50, 60 people. And I'd say, you should get your real estate license. And I'd give a 2-hour pitch. I was a great motivator, great speaker, I think. And I got a lot of people to sign up. And then out of that group, maybe 5 or 10 people to sign up to get their license, maybe 2 or 3 would go through the process. Maybe I'd hire 1, right? So every month I would be hiring 1 to 2 people as a result of this. But the problem with that, even though we grew the office, was that 80 to 90% of these people, there's an 87% attrition rate in our industry. 8 to 9 people are going to exit the business in 2 years. So all this time and effort, money went out the window. So what I after 5 years, I pivoted and I said, I've got to change my thoughts and I got to go after experienced agents. I got to look at myself, my business is in a whole different way. So that's when I really started to build where we went from 0 to 17 offices.
Right. Okay. So talk us through talk through the pivot.
Yeah.
Like, what was the thought process? Like, again, there's something to be said about bringing new people into a brokerage and then training them and then creating that level of loyalty. But realistically, that's a great story. That essence of that story, that if you, again, you've got to look at the ROI, as we mentioned just before.
Yeah.
Okay. In the perspective to, it's gone into a negative perspective when you buy leads now. But that said, is that it's kind of the same way when you start training new agents into the business. If you go through that attrition rate, it can be, you might be really good at it. But that said, is that there's still going to be an element of people getting into the business in a first degree that have financial difficulties and other circumstances outside of skill set or training or opportunity that then get in the way of that. What's the pivot? How did you pivot to then grow that business?
So what I started to look at is if I just accept, no matter how good a trainer, no matter how good a coach, a mentor I am, I'm still going to lose 80 to 90% of these people. What I have to do is I have to look at people that have already been vetted by the industry for the last 2 years. They've made it past the 2-year threshold and they're still in the industry. They're still fighting through it, but they're not at their full potential. This is like the perfect person for me. And my perfect recruit really is a $2 to $10 million producer who I can take from there to grow them to 5 to 20 to 30 to $40 million in production, because now I have something I can really offer them. And those are the people that will be ultimately loyal to me. When you talk about loyalty with new agents, especially new agents who start with you often can't get over this idea that maybe the grass is greener somewhere else. And a lot of times it's just like a listing. Would you rather be the first listing or the second listing if it doesn't sell? I'd rather be the second listing agent because I want to get a better price and better terms, and I'm going to get that property sold. So I would rather be the second person that people come to work for because I'm going to show them what it is like to work for a broker that can actually help them succeed. So that was my pivot. Is I started to say, okay, I need to build a platform, a tech stack, a coaching stack, a training stack, a support system stack that will take these agents and help them grow their businesses, and then prove that the proof is in the pudding.
Right. I think that, so this comes through the nurturing of coaching as we sort of segue into that section of what you do. You run a separate business as well called eRealEstateCoach.com. That is something where ultimately I'm assuming that you're coaching people through the process. This is the sort of same philosophy that you're putting into your offices as well and with the people that are working with you. Yeah. Walk us through, eRealEstateCoach.com, what the programs look like, what you're doing in that sense to help people and to grow their business or to take them from 5 $5 million, $10 million in sales to 20, 30, $40 million.
Well, I think everybody craves, even though we're independent contractors, we can all independently be broke, right? So what I say to agents is what everybody craves really is they really crave accountability. And
Right.
so that's why you hire a coach. Like my wife, when I turned 50, got me a gift certificate to a dietitian. I thought, wow, this is an interesting gift. You
Wow.
gained a little bit of weight, you need
Wow.
to go to a dietitian. So what does a dietitian do? You go in and you get on the scale, right? And she tells you got to eat better and exercise more. Well, we already all know, right? But from a coaching perspective, it's kind of the same thing. When we are meeting with agents and we're coaching agents, we're telling them a lot of the same things they're hearing on podcasts or reading in books or going to seminars. They're going to designation programs. They're hearing some of the same things. But what we are as a good coach is a mirror. And we're saying, hey, but what did you do last week for real? Let's really talk about this. Let's get into this. Let's dive deeper into this. And there's something called the Hawthorne effect, which is when people are watched, they perform at a higher level. And so independent contractors that are not watched, that are not monitored, sink to the level of mediocrity that surrounds them. And so if they're in an office where everybody's doing one deal a year, that's what they're going to do. But if they suddenly are being watched and the broker's like, hey, what'd you do last week? They'll go from 1 to 10 to 20 because they're being watched and have somebody watching and helping them be accountable to themselves. And that's the number one thing we do as coaches. And that's what we do with our coaching program as well.
Okay. So it's a funny industry from a perspective of people usually get into it for the autonomy that there is. You know, at the end of the day, they get in it for the independence that it provides. Right. Obviously, there's a financial. Some of them get into it for financial. Some of them get in to help people. There's all of those things, but usually there is an underlying thing that there's a level of autonomy. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, people don't thrive with that level of autonomy. No. Usually they sink. Right. So therefore, providing that accountability, I think that is one of the things that. But it's really hard though, Jim. Because at the end of the day, as leaders of your individual company or leaders of your team, I think that it's one of the things that leaders definitely struggle with is actually holding people accountable because they think that people don't want to be held accountable. Yeah. Do you need to go with a philosophy of the fact that you deep down know that everybody thinks wants to be held accountable, or do you need to sort of use it more on a case-by-case basis?
I think everybody wants a level of accountability. And I think as leaders, we have to show up and be accountable first, and they can watch us and be influenced by our level of professionalism in our business. I'll give you an example of that when it comes to recruiting. As a recruiter, I do exactly the same things I should be as an agent's doing every day. I'm lead generating, I'm calling people, I'm texting people, I'm doing video text, I'm handwriting notes. Every single thing that applies to an agent building their sphere of influence, building their book of business applies to us. And if agents see us doing it consistently and we're holding ourselves to this high level, they're going to start to watch. They're going to be like, oh, they're doing it. I should be doing it as well. But to go beyond your point there, what I do with agents is I'll say, especially when they're starting, I'll say, what level of accountability would you like? Would you like me to meet with you every week, every 2 weeks, every month, every 6 months? Would you never let me to talk to you about accountability at all? I'll let you make the decision. And they'll tell me, they'll say, I want you to do it every week or every 2 weeks. And I'll say, would you like me to do that with a document that you can actually write down what you're doing? Because I have something called the daily dashboard for high performance. So I give it to people. They have to fill it out. It records every single thing they're doing every day every week. And they can email it to me. And I can look at it and say, okay, here's what you did. Here's what you didn't do. I let them decide. But here's the thing. If they're not performing, then the decision goes away from them and I decide. So, Ben, you're at my company and you're not performing. I'll say, Ben, I've been looking and you haven't closed a deal in a couple of months. I'd like to start meeting with you every week and I'd like to start using my daily dashboard. Let's get you back on track. I know this isn't where you want to be, right? You want to be at a place where you're performing. And everybody's like, no, I want you to help me. And then they buy into it that way.
Yeah, and if they're not receptive to that, ultimately, then they're probably not going to be a fit for the culture that you're trying to generate. 100%. So that was going to be one of my questions. Is that like I think that there's an element of this is what goes unsaid within a meeting. Like I think that agents will always say to you that they want to be held accountable or they don't want to be held accountable. You know, there's either one or the other answer. But it's really what goes unsaid is really the proof is in the actions that then are taken in order to then evaluate what they probably do need. Yeah. And then if you try to offer them what you believe that they need as a leader, if they're not receptive to that, then there might not be a match. That's probably the easiest way to vet. Yep. However, leading into the daily dashboard a little bit more, I want to talk a little bit more practicality sense for some of the agents. What does the daily dashboard sort of look like and what are the things that you're measuring?
So what the first thing that it measures is it measures the amount of time prospecting. So
Okay.
we have this standard, we call it the 4-1-1-1-1 standard. So it's 4 ones. First one is I want to spend 1 hour uninterrupted prospecting every day. Second one is I want to set an appointment every single day with a buyer, seller, or sphere member. The third one is because I'm setting one appointment, I'm going on one appointment a day. And the fourth one is that I'm adding one person a day to my sphere of influence. So I want to make sure I'm hitting that standard as kind of my baseline. But below that, so we'll record how many hours of prospecting. Below that, we'll say exactly what does that mean? Phone calls, text messages, video text, handwritten cards, social media posts, every single thing that they could be doing, they're making a note of what they've been doing. And then we'll have another block on the dashboard that will say, did you update your CRM? Have you updated your social media? You're checking these boxes off. And then we have a results section. So we're a big believer that I can't control the result, but I can control my work. So the results will come. I just got to focus on my work, right? So, but we do record results. So did you set an appointment today? Did you take a listing today? Did you create an escrow today? We measure that as well. So, but we focus on work.
Well, no, it's very practical and it makes a lot of sense. And it's funny that if you were to review your day, you could look at it and actually, a lot of the time, you'd probably be a little bit disappointed with what you actually really did achieve.
100%.
That's right. Indeed.
No question.
So I think that there's a part of this that for 10 years, Jim, you taught an ABR is the acronym for it,
Yep.
Which is an Accredited Buyer Representative course. I want to talk to you a little bit about that because what was the agenda in it? What were the things that were taught? Is it still available? I know that you're not currently teaching it, but
Yep.
there's obviously a lot of talk about the buyer representative side of our business at this point, considering the lawsuit that's going on a national perspective and getting national press anyway. There's never been more awareness around the buyer side commission than there ever is right now. So I just want to talk about your experience over a decade of doing that and teaching it. What are the things people miss in the buyer side typically, or or as an agent, and is that something they should be doing now? Just a general overview of that.
Sure. So the ABR class, a great class. You can still take it today. You can take it online. I'd highly recommend it. But the focus of the ABR is to help you to become a much better buyer representative. So, and what that means is, I want to start treating buyers like I treat sellers. When we work with a seller, we generally sit down and we do a listing presentation. We talk about our services, what we can do for them, how we can help them, and how we can, get them top dollar and achieve their real estate goals. We tend not to do that with buyers. We just throw them in our car and just show them homes, and hopefully we get right an offer. But the ABR is all about, let's get a presentation together. Let's now talk about putting them into a buyer representation agreement that they sign that says you're going to be loyal to me, and if you buy a house, I'm going to be paid a fee. And that's kind of a breakdown of the history of buyer representation over the last 100 years. But of course, just here in the last 18 months, we've had a complete revolution, and it's a tidal shift. It's the biggest shift in our industry I've seen in my entire career, and I've lived through some big shifts. So when you mentioned the lawsuits that are occurring, the Burnett Sitzer case, which was just lost by NAR, that's a $5 billion case. What a lot of people don't realize is they think, yeah, but it'll be appealed. It doesn't really apply to me yet. I'm not going to worry about it yet. Big mistake. That's exactly the wrong way to look at this, because what's happening right now across the country is that sellers are seeing this, and buyers, they're opening up their newspaper, they're reading the news, they're seeing it on ABC, Washington Post, New York Times. And what a seller is going to do now is when you come to their listing, they're going to say, so I just read this article that says I don't have to pay a buyer agent commission. Is that true? And as realtors, we have to say it is true. You don't have to pay a buyer's agent commission, but maybe here's why you should. So this is like an impact that's starting to happen right now. And just to tag on to this for a second, there's a lot of agents that are just hanging on by their fingernails in this market. They're barely staying in the market, right? And so when a seller says, do I have to pay a BAC? They say, no, you don't. Just sign the listing. Just give me my listing fee. So you're already starting to see in every MLS across the country, listings coming in with zero BAC right now. It's happening everywhere. So when that happens, as an agent, you're saying it doesn't apply to me, it doesn't affect me. Yes, it does. Because now you go out and start showing homes today, and of the 10 properties you're showing, 3 months from now, 3 of them are not offering a BAC. How are you going to get paid, right? So this is why this is so critical and so important right now.
Right. Well, I think that there's a lot of hype in the industry at the moment, and there's a lot of change that is spoken about.
Yeah.
I think that that creates a level of panic within people.
Yes.
obviously them doing this accredited buyer representative course could obviously give them an understanding to tune up their buyer representation game.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you think that as an industry we should be aware of? What do you think the major changes coming down the pipe for us here in the next 12, 18 months? Is there something else that we should be worried about, something else that we should be looking out for?
Well, I'll give you three things. First of all, I'm also teaching across the country now. I don't teach the ABR, but I'm teaching a class called the Buyer Representation Mastery class. So
Sure.
brokerages and franchises are hiring me to come in and teach this half-day class to get their agents tuned up for this. But there's three things that we're talking about right now. One is every single agent in America should have a buyer presentation, just like you have a listing presentation. And you should really get familiar with it and really be able to present well
Sure.
all the reasons why somebody should work with you and really value you as an agent. The second thing everybody needs to do is for their local market, because every market's different, they should know their buyer representation agreement inside out and cold. That's the agreement that they would sign with you, that loyalty agreement. And then the third thing they need to do is they also need to transition over their seller presentation. Your listing presentation now has to pivot to deal with the conversation around buyer agent commissions. And so I'll give you an example of that. If I'm sitting with a seller and they say that to me, they say, Jim, do I have to pay a BAC? My answer would be, well, you don't. It's true that you don't actually legally or technically have to pay a BAC, but can I tell you why I think it's in your best interest to do so? And here's the reason. It's all about exposure and getting you top dollar. And if a buyer agrees to pay you your price, it's going to pay for everything, your listing commission and the buyer commission. So we just kind of build it into the price. But now let's assume you don't pay the BAC and you say, I'm just going to leave that zero. What's going to happen is the estimates are between 30 and 50% of the buyers in the market will not be able to write a check to the buyer's agent. So the only option they have is to just exclude your house from showings. So you're going to be kind of thrown to the wayside and they'll go look at listings that do offer a BAC. And that's not in your best interest, right? So we have to how do we talk about this? What are we going to do to deal with this, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a part of this as well that I one of our team actually on the podcast the other day came up with a beautiful line that I really enjoyed. It was a very subtle and way to come back at the seller a little bit about that. It's like, hey guys, when you purchase this property, did the seller pay your buyer's agent?
I love it. I love it.
And just giving just, and again, it's not, well, you're not trying to have a dig at them. They're like, well, I guess so. Yeah. It's like, we want to give the same opportunity to somebody else that's purchasing your property to have representation as well.
Right.
So again, I think that there's several subtle ways that we can go about it. I think that the first of all, Jim, I think that this is the one thing that we always are telling people is just don't get defensive. No. Just please don't get defensive with it. Like, just really embrace, get an understanding of where it's coming from and go from there.
Yeah.
But as we wrap up sort of the end of our time, I do want to make it a little bit more of a habit with my podcast moving forward when I've got guests like yourself on in the real estate industry. Sometimes we have attorneys on, sometimes we have all different spaces, and primarily our listeners are in the real estate industry. Sure. I like to talk about a couple of things. Where do you go to keep as up to date as possible in the real estate marketplace? Like is it Inman? Is it, The Real Deal? Is it like anything that you subscribe to that really gives you finger on the pulse, so to speak?
So one of the number one places I go is the NAR Economist blog. So if you're not on the NAR Economist blog, I think that's a really good way to get some deep insights into what the realtor organization looks at. I also look at the NAHB, the National Home Builders Association blog as well. Those are two really, I think, insightful blogs that I use almost every day. I also look at, the classics. I look at Inman and Riz, and I look at, the ones that you typically see. But those are some of the ones. I also think Redfin has got some actually really strong data. And
they do some good stuff. Yeah, they do some good stuff with their journalism department. Inman, I like Inman, don't get me wrong, but the volume of emails that I get from those people makes me hate them. It's unbelievable.
It's terrible.
But anyway,
yeah. I agree with you 100%.
Give me a real estate life hack. Like give me something like that's not like, I don't want to talk about how do you grow your business or whatever it may be, but is there a life hack that you've got that you might want to pass down? Now, again, if you don't, that's fine. I just, it's a little bit of a curly question, but like, for example, like it might be working out in the morning, might be taking an ice bath, might be doing those little things. Is there a life hack that you found that makes you more focused and consistent?
Well, I'll tell you the number one thing I've done when you bring up working out. First of all, I get up at 5 a.m. every morning. It gives me an hour and a half of quiet time where I'm not being interrupted. But it also, after that hour and a half, so now I'm at 6:30, I take another hour and I work out. And that's been transformative for me and my energy level. I look at us as corporate athletes, and to have high energy And to be able to come in with positive attitudes, we got to de-stress, and we got to have this ability to really be a high level. You got to exercise and work out. Our number one engine, our number one asset is our body. And if our body breaks down, we're not going to succeed. Last thing I'll say as far as a life hack is you have to have the absolute and total clarity on your, what I call your 5 non-negotiables. Those are the 5 things I have to get done every day to hit my goals. If I don't have clarity on that, I'm never going to hit my goals.
Yeah, that's fair. That's great. That's really good advice. And then podcasts, any podcasts or books that you would recommend at this point, that you might listen to on a frequent basis, or read, any books that you would recommend?
Atomic Habits, great book. If you haven't read that one, I think that's a really good one. The book, it's an older book, but it's a great book called Positioning by Al Ries and Jack Trout. Fantastic book. Okay. Also, I would look at Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goldman. Great book for realtors to read. And let me give you one more. Influence by Robert Cialdini. Best book ever written on sales.
Oh, really? Influence by Robert Cialdini. Okay, cool. Yep. And then final question, a little bit of a curly one, but I like to, so I'm a type of person that I won't listen, read, or do anything without actually a recommendation. So this is just helping people, get to that point. What's something non-real estate related, a TV show, series, or something like that you've really enjoyed, maybe a movie that you've absolutely loved?
I love, my wife and I are watching Billions right now, and I just love the energy of Billions. Man. So Billions is my game right now. I'm watching that every day.
I have to be honest though. Again, I've got to make sure that I don't spoil it for you though.
Yeah.
Is that when Bobby Axelrod leaves, it goes to shit, for lack of better terminology.
Oh no.
Okay. So anyway, it's fine. So sorry to be an anticlimax there, but I love that show as well. Jim, thank you so much for your time. It's been really appreciated. Thanks for jumping on to Rethink Real Estate, and all the best in the future. But we'll stay connected.
Thank you.
So about 75% of our audience hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed to our podcast. It would mean the world to us, and it would help this podcast more than you know to expand our reach if you were to like, follow, or subscribe on any of the platforms that you're watching or listening on. Thanks again.